What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a heart-pounding video about spoilers. An interesting subject when you review video games generally, and I would imagine many forms of other media where they may be a concern. However, in my case, spoilers have always been a little bit on the odd side, for a variety of reasons, not least of which because a lot of my reviews are 100% reviews, and I think if you're clicking on that, at the very least, small visual spoilers may well be expected, and some of that's on you. Take some responsibility for yourself. But realistically, I think that's just the tip of the iceberg, and I just felt like talking about this today, so here we are, I guess. So broadly speaking, there aren't exactly a lot of rules to doing reviews on YouTube. There's a couple of minor ones, and if anything, more often than not, they are simply suggestions, because at the end of the day, regardless of what you want to review, be that video games, other forms of media, products, etc., if you've used them, have some opinions about it, you can, of course, collect your thoughts, make a video, upload it to YouTube, and then everything else is kind of just how people react to the information presented. And for media in general, at least, there's a sort of unspoken rule of trying to avoid spoilers for people, mostly just because it's the polite thing to do, or at the very least, if you're going to spoil things, warn people ahead of time so they can avoid them. Fair enough, I think we're all on board up to this point. The thing that gets sort of odd about that is that, just as a person, I do not care about spoilers at all. Spoilers are not something that are capable of ruining a good story to me. And I think there's a variety of reasons for that, but if I had to boil it down to one thing, it's mostly just that I have consumed so much media, be it video games or other forms, books, etc., over the years, that realistically, there's only so many situations. And if you give me a situation, using all of those different context clues and everything else, I can probably piece together what's going to happen next, because both the person in the situation you've described as well as the others associated with it are really only going to react in a few different ways. And while the specifics of those situations and their narratives can be especially interesting, if you boil them down to their sort of core functions, they're really not that new or surprising, and I guess that's why spoilers just don't really bother me at this point. If it's a well-told story, it'll shine through regardless as far as I'm concerned, and yet there are some people who I would go so far as to say that if you spoil even something tiny, you have ruined their day. And that, of course, bleeds back into how people are reacting to the things you are putting out there. But that's actually where it gets a little complicated, because while some things are pretty universally, obviously, a spoiler, when you actually get into the finer details of it, you'll probably find out pretty quick that not everybody actually agrees on what is and is not a spoiler. In fact, one of my favorite examples of this, and something that comes up semi-regularly on the channel, is that, as a 100% review, I may well include some footage of, like, say, a late game fight or a situation, that kind of thing. And while I try to be mindful and leave those clips devoid of a lot of the context that would, to my mind, constitute the spoiler part of it, I invariably am going to get people who are like, how could you show that little bit of footage? That is a spoiler. And the interesting thing about that situation in particular to me is that I find that the context added by the person commenting it as a spoiler is more of a spoiler than the footage without the context. It's like, if anything, your comment explaining what it is and why it is a spoiler is the spoiler, my guy. In fact, to give an even more specific example, I'm pretty sure in my Baldur's Gate 1 review I have a bit of footage from the very end of the game there, and out of context, it's literally just any other fight you may well have in that game. But exactly that happened. You get people commenting like, oh, how could you show this boss fight or whatever? And it's like, man, unless someone reads your comment, they're going to have no idea what they are looking at there. So how would that constitute a spoiler as far as I'm concerned? But let's take it one step farther, because as with anything, there are layers to it. So another thing that I personally tend to go by is that if it is used in the official marketing for something, it's not a spoiler. Or if it is given as a sort of plot set up to the broader situation and happens relatively early, that's also not a spoiler, even if it seems like it's something really big and important. And yet, I know from conversations I have had previously that not everybody agrees with those things. And so, when it comes to addressing spoilers and things like that as a video game review channel who's been at it for a while, it is kind of an interesting balancing act between my own personal preference, which is that I just don't care about spoilers at all, against, of course, the sort of opposite train of thought and the people who just want to walk away from a review with a lot of information, but nothing that breaks the story for them, as an example. And so for those people, it's a bit of an interesting dance trying to give all that information while also not stepping over whatever the line happens to be for that individual, which, as you would imagine, gets complicated very, very quickly. Another sort of funnier aspect of this, though, is more unique to the content creator side of things, because I would say that if you want to do this like as a full-blown job, that kind of thing, you kind of just have to get okay with spoilers, because oftentimes one-pagers for various games that can come in via their reviews and stuff often will just straight up include spoilers as like things they would like you to not show in an effort to avoid spoilers, as an example. So it's like in telling you the thing to avoid, they actually spoil it for you anyway, which is one of the reasons I suppose it's good that I don't particularly care about them, because it really is not uncommon at all for the information sent with a review key to be a major spoiler. And so I guess for all of those reasons, this has always been just a really interesting subject to me because of the very, I would say, diverse reactions to something being spoiled. You have people like myself who don't care at all. You have the other side of that where if you spoil even a tiny thing, you have ruined that person's day and their enjoyment of that thing. And then, of course, there's the various shades of people in the middle who have their own definitions of what a spoiler is and what constitutes an egregious one, that kind of thing. And there's just so much interplay between all of those different trains of thoughts that it becomes a bit tedious to deal with at times. And I say tedious because no matter how careful you are about, editing certain footage or warning people ahead of time, you're never going to please everybody with it. Someone is inevitably going to complain about some aspect of it because you didn't feel the same way about whatever is and isn't a spoiler to that person. So it can absolutely happen that you take all these measures to avoid it, and it happens anyway, and you still have to hear about it. But where you could probably guess that comes up the most is trying to convey as much information about a thing to someone without overstepping whatever boundary it is they happen to have. And that gets even more difficult when you're trying to do, say, a 100% review. And that is why I ultimately do think there needs to be some self-accountability here, because if you click on a video like that and you get a, spoiler of some description to you, that really is something you kind of have to take some responsibility for. But I guess to start wrapping this up, covering spoilers, or, trying not to, I guess, really, is the type of thing that is just really odd about what I do, because I have to take just like all these measures and steps to try to avoid ruining something for someone else, but also at the same time, it's not something I personally care about in basically any capacity. Which, believe it or not, comes up more than you may well think when it comes to video game reviews. There are just kind of things in general that you learn to cover and go over, even if they're not something that is particularly meaningful to you, as an example. It's just that in all of those other cases, those things are relatively straightforward, even if you don't care about, say, full voice acting in a video game. That's not something I care about. But it matters to a lot of people, so I try to mention it in a context where that may not be a given, or is just something someone may want to know very generally, because for them, that is an important aspect of it. It's just that with spoilers in particular, it is just so all over the place in terms of what is and isn't acceptable, and as a result, things that seem innocuous to me are just like really big deals to other people. So at the end of the day, there's really no solution here. It's just something I wanted to talk about. I would say for the most part, you really just kind of do the best you can with it. I try to, obviously call out things like spoiler warnings, try to give people plenty of notice about the things they are about to see so they're not caught off guard, that kind of thing. But it's also just never going to be completely foolproof either, and I can either, acknowledge that and make the content that I want to make in spite of it, because I suppose the only other option is not doing anything, being paralyzed in fear of upsetting someone about it, I guess. But obviously I've got games to review, so that doesn't really work for me. All said though, that's pretty much everything I've got on the subject. I'd be curious to hear your own thoughts about it, I suppose. And so if you feel so inclined, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. And do try not to spoil the fact at the end of this video is going to be a sick-ass guitar solo, but regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.